Hey, it's your host, Brandon Laws. This is Transform Your Workplace, the show that gives leaders like you practical ideas to build places where people thrive, cultures get stronger, and achieve business results. Every conversation here is about turning good intent into repeatable habits at work. Today's episode is sponsored by Xenium HR. Too many organizations juggle separate vendors for payroll, HR, and benefits, and they pay for it in chaos, risk, and lost time. Xenium's complete HR plus payroll solution brings everything together in one seamless system, backed by a dedicated team that actually knows your business. An HR business partner, payroll specialist, benefits expert, plus a deep bench behind them. One partner, one platform, fewer headaches, much better outcomes. Learn more about Xenium's complete HR plus payroll solution at xeniumhr.com. All right, on to today's show. I am joined by Wes Adams, co-author of Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. In our conversation, Wes unpacks why alignment is the foundation of meaningful work and how leaders can use the 3 C's, community, contribution, and challenge, to help people thrive. He shares practical ways to reconnect hybrid teams, give feedback that truly sticks, and create aligned autonomy so people have freedom within guardrails. You'll also hear a powerful story of a data center engineer who rediscovered her purpose during the pandemic, showing how small moments that matter can completely change how we see our work. All right, let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Wes Adams. Wes, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon.
We're going to talk about your book. It's called Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. And I want to start with the heart of it. So you say meaning is that core driver that of thriving teams and high-performing employees. And you have a great metaphor in the book. You say that sun, soil, and space is that which makes our gardens grow, and you say that meaning is just like that. It's that core ingredient to high performance. Why do you believe that?
Well, I think the science supports it. We've done, my co-author Tamara Miles and I, who unfortunately can't be here today, and I have been doing research at University of Pennsylvania for a number of years now on meaning at work, and there's also several decades of empirical research on it. And what we've learned is that it's the upstream factor that drives all of the outcomes that we're looking for. So that belief that your work matters, that it's meaningful, it's what creates job satisfaction, your well-being at work, your own productivity and engagement. And also at the organizational level, it drives innovation, it drives revenue and profitability. There's new research out of Oxford showing that, even stock price. So this is a very powerful way to look at, rather than trying to manage the outcomes, really going upstream and looking at the things that drive those outcomes, which are the 3 sources of meaning, what we call the 3 C's: community, contribution, and challenge.
Early in the book, you argue that every job can and should be meaningful. And I think it's a bold statement, because I think there's a lot of people that don't find meaning in their work. So what do you say to those skeptics who believe that only certain roles, maybe teachers and doctors and people who are curing cancer, can only offer meaning in their work?
This is a question we get very often, that idea that it has to be some kind of higher purpose-driven job, or you have to be, feeding the world, or, saving people's lives for your work to be meaningful. And what we found is that that's not the case. There are potentially really impactful moments of meaning that can happen in every job, every day, if you know where to look, and especially if you have the guidance of a great leader. And that's one of the big things that we focus on in our book. But what we learned was that your job doesn't have to be your life's calling for your work to feel worthwhile. You can have these moments of community where you connect with someone, you feel like you belong, you're valued for yourself and your full ideas, and contribution where you understand how your work is positively impacting other people. And that could be your customers, it could be contributing to larger business goals, or it could even be just doing something that benefits your coworker, has a positive impact on their work stream. And finally, challenge that individual opportunity to learn and grow and develop your skills and capabilities. These are things that are available. We've had conversations with people who are custodians, people who are hairstylists, people who work in tech, people who work all across the board. So these things are common to every job. It doesn't mean that every job is going to be your favorite job ever, or that it's your life's calling, but it's still possible for there to be, pretty significant moments of meaning.
Yeah, and you highlight a story which I was struck by. Keisha, the data center engineer who rediscovered her purpose in work in the early days of the pandemic, I think was feeling disconnected in those times, but she went through a transformation. And so what does that say about the power of connecting employees to the impact that they're making? And, highlight that story and just maybe how she went through that transformation too.
Yeah. So for your listeners who haven't necessarily read the book yet, this is a story of some work that Tamara and I did at a Microsoft data center. We were working with their cloud operations team for a while. And I don't know if you've ever been to a data center, but they're basically these huge warehouses full of servers, just rows and rows of like big black server boxes. And, some of the people that work there, their job is to set them up to make sure that they're operating. They're supposed to get 99.99% uptime. And, this is the cloud. These are the computers that are running all of the cloud software and the things that we do every day. And this was kind of in the early days of the pandemic when we were doing this particular workshop. And Keisha, who is one of the folks working there, whose job it was to keep these servers up and running, they were essential workers. So while many of us were working from home, she still had to come in every day. She's traveling, she's around other people. We're a ways on from that now, but it's kind of hard to remember like how scary that was at the time because we didn't know what was going on. And also, she's like, I don't understand why this is worthwhile, like with everything else going on in the world. Like I'm coming in, I'm like making sure wires are plugged in and, servers are running, but like that's not, she was thinking about quitting, about potentially going home to be with her family. And, we took her and the rest of her team through this exercise that we often take people through around, what are some moments in your work that are meaningful to you? Why do you think your job matters? And through that process, she sort of had a light bulb moment where she realized the servers that I'm helping keep up and running, I mean, it may seem kind of like mundane work, but these are the servers, this is the cloud that's allowing people to connect with each other. We were all on video calls, that's how we were getting work done. It's how we were staying in touch with our loved ones. It's how kids were getting educated, right? Because they couldn't go into schools. It's how doctors and nurses and scientists were sharing information, were figuring out how to come up with a vaccine, all of those sorts of things. And so actually it was critical infrastructure, and she was really responsible for connecting people rather than just wires. And so she actually like scribbled that down on a Post-it note and stuck it on her computer monitor so that she could remember day to day why she was doing these things. And it didn't mean her job was perfect from that point on, but she kind of had this reminder that she could lean into. She's like, oh, like this is a meaningful moment and this is something that I can rely on. And actually it's what inspired the cover of our book, which is, if you've seen it, Post-it notes. And so that's kind of like an origin story for one of our early experiences doing that work.
I love that. Did she come to the realization on her own, or did somebody else like point out the fact that her work is meaningful?
I think it was sort of a combination, because we had part of that exercise was people sharing stories, and it was, I think someone sharing something similar to that, and then she kind of built on that with her story. So actually one of the practices that we recommend is telling some of your moments, that what we call the moments that matter. And there's a worksheet or a canvas for that in the book and also on the website that, you can use. But just by identifying these moments, it can be really powerful for us, and telling other people about these moments can be really powerful for them and help them find their own moments and also see their work in a different way. And so just that process of talking about it can really help spread meaning among the team.
There's a line in the book that I absolutely love. Leaders are gardeners. They create the conditions for meaning to grow. What does that mean in practice on a day-to-day for a leader?
I love that metaphor too. And I think one of the reasons I love it is because earlier in my career, I really approached my work like an architect. I was like, oh, it's my job to figure out the right thing to do, to create the structures and to draw up the blueprint for that. And then somebody else needs to execute on that. And that technical expertise is really important as we're individual contributors, right? Like we want to deliver in our areas of excellence and we want our work to be accurate and driving business priorities forward. And when it comes to being a leader or a manager of people who's enabling other people to do that, your area of technical expertise doesn't really matter anymore for leadership, right? Just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're good at managing or leading other people to do that thing, because leading is about enabling other people. It's a set of skills that's around helping other people grow, nurturing them, providing them with the, I think, as you said earlier, the right levels of sun, nutrients in the soil, space to grow, which kind of, line up with the 3 C's of meaning. So, you have to learn how to do that and create the space for that. And instead of an architect, become more of a gardener. And I think in my own journey, I've gotten to be like a landscape architect, and I'm still working my way to being like just a gardener. But it's a process. It's a learning process.
Here's a striking stat from your book, Wes. You share that 50% of an employee's experience of meaning at work is tied to leadership behavior. And I think that's huge. So what are some of the most common ways that leaders are unknowingly undermining meaning at work?
I think this was a huge learning for us. And this is a statistic that actually came from our research. So previous to our work, most of the research and a lot of the literature and the books around meaning at work was about the individual. How can I find a more meaningful job or a more meaningful career? What can I do for that? And Tamara and I really felt like the impact of the leader and the organization on that had been a little bit overlooked. And we were really interested in what the leader's role was in that and how we could potentially create more meaning for people at scale by giving leaders the tools to do that. And so what we learned was that these leadership behaviors and organizational structures account for about half of how meaningful people find their work, which is first of all, a huge responsibility, but also I think an incredible opportunity, if you get those things right, to really amplify and scale the work that people are doing across the organization. And so, we continue to do empirical research and determine what specifically those behaviors were, what specifically those organizational structures were. And that's how we kind of came to the 3 C's. And so all of those things fall under each of those 3. And there was another element that came up in the research, which we call alignment, which was sort of foundational for meaning. It didn't add a lot of meaning to have it, but if you didn't have it, it was the quickest way to destroy meaning. And so that's, alignment it's values alignment essentially. So between what people say they believe in and what they do. Are your company values just words on the wall, or are leaders actually behaving in line with those values? And are your systems and processes and structures aligned with those values? Are you saying that you value teamwork, but incentivizing people with bonuses for their individual performance that maybe take them away from teamwork because they're getting paid if they're working, individually? A lot of these potential misalignments show up in organizations that, Tamara and I are both consultants and we do leadership development and org design work. And, this is something that we see very often that isn't that difficult to fix, but, very often gets overlooked. So leaders being good role models and good stewards of those values and consistently showing alignment is foundational.
So you're saying alignment is foundational. You need to have that before the 3 C's. The 3 C's wouldn't even matter if you don't have alignment. Is that what you're basically saying?
Exactly. Like it really takes away from everything else if you don't have it. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
And then, like, I'm really curious how you and Tamara landed on the three C's. Like, with the research I'm sure you did, what led you to those three components?
It's just sort of what shook out. We followed initially, I'm going to get a little bit academic here
Please
for
do.
a second.
That's what people are here for.
The initial part of our research was qualitative. And so we spoke to dozens of leaders who were doing this really well. And we followed what's called a grounded theory methodology, which is how Brene Brown works a lot of the time and some other folks. And it essentially means you're looking for common themes as you talk to people and then continuing to refine those themes. And so that's how we created our initial list of potentially what some of these leadership behaviors were. And then we switched to quantitative. So we started testing those things against people's experience of meaning and also their engagement, their job satisfaction, their intentions to quit, and a lot of other things. And through that, there's a statistical validation process, which fortunately we had another member of our team working on.
That's not your strength.
Yeah, a little bit beyond me. Yeah, partnering with people who are good at things that you're not good at is one of the biggest things I've learned in my career as a key to success. And so there were then a number of behaviors that got through that validation process that we knew were having an impact on things, and we kind of took a look at those, and also just based on our conversations and our consulting work and some of the other literature, it really made sense. Like these three areas pretty strongly intersected to create meaningful work. And what we found also was that there's a bit of a multiplier effect between the three C's. So, when all of them are present, they kind of play on each other. And some of these behaviors create meaning in multiple areas. And also if one of those things is missing, it can cancel out the other two. And so, a good example of that is like working at a nonprofit organization that you would think would be super meaningful, right? Mission driven, you're trying to accomplish something positive in the world. But if you don't have community, if you have a toxic workplace and people aren't treated well within the organization, doesn't matter how great the mission is or how much progress you're making, you're probably not going to find a lot of meaning in that job because, that's canceling things out. So we want leaders to pay attention to all three.
Yeah. Let's get into some of all three of the C's and start with community. You wrote that trust at work is the oil that keeps the gears turning smoothly. And when people trust each other, it strengthens connection and boosts performance as a team. So for leaders, how do they intentionally foster deeper connections amongst their teams? And especially in this weird environment that we're in with remote and hybrid environments?
This is very tricky. So one of the things that we've seen, especially since COVID, since we've moved to, for many of us, more of a remote and hybrid environment, is a decrease in community. People are feeling more disconnected. They're feeling lonelier. It's harder to connect with people at work because the unplanned interactions, bumping into somebody in the break room or grabbing lunch or, chatting a little bit before the meeting starts, those just don't happen organically when we're scheduling our calls and, jumping from one Zoom meeting or Teams meeting to the next. And so it has to be much more intentional. This is one of the things we talk about that is a new leadership capability, or at least a new organizational capability that I don't know that a lot of companies have caught on to yet. But you actually have to plan these things. You have to go out of your way in a way that you might have like planned a conference once a year or a retreat or whatever. You need to be figuring out how every week you're doing a little bit of that with the people on your team. And so some ways that happens there's one practice from Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General of the United States for quite a while, that he used on his team, which he called the full story. And he would give one person at the beginning of every weekly team meeting 5 minutes to bring in an object or pull an object. So I might, like grab a scarf, or a blanket or something from my couch and take that over and say, hey, this is a blanket that means a lot to me because my grandmother knitted it and she gave it to me. And so I keep it around because it reminds me of her and this is what she was like. And, and it's just a way to, allow people to bring a little bit of themselves into the conversation, and also, create a little bit more of an opportunity to connect around things that weren't work related. And that was a really powerful practice. And what he found was that people were connecting more outside of the meetings because of that. Like, oh, my grandmother knitted too. And like, I keep something similar or whatever. And because of that, people were collaborating more. They felt better about calling each other if they had a problem or needed some advice. And so it was really effective, not just to create community, but also to enable some other things. And so small things like that. One of the most powerful items on our list, checking to see if people felt a sense of community, was we asked people to agree with the statement, my leader cares about what's happening in my life outside of work, right? Asking people, hey, how was your weekend? What's going on with you? And then actually paying attention to the answer and engaging with that is small, but really a powerful way to give people a sense of community. And it just takes a little time. It's something that people have to carve out time for.
You share some amazing examples of rituals, from Patagonia to Zappos to Google's Noogler hat, I think, for new employees. What do small cultural rituals, like, why do they matter so much in creating belonging and meaning?
I think it's because it makes you feel a part of the group. I think we've all had that experience. It's like an initiation, or you get a pin or a patch or, some kind of artifact that you've earned to be a part of the team. And it's a way for us to tell or to shape the story around who we are, right? Like, I've earned this hat or I've earned this badge because I'm now a part of this group. And this is the way that I know that that's true, because I've gotten this thing, right? Or I've been through this ritual that I can now, say I've been a part of, and I share with other people. We talk a bit about shared experiences in the community section of the book, right? And when you have a shared experience, when you do something with someone, and that can be as small as, going to get coffee with them, or it could be as meaningful as, volunteering with someone, or, doing something else. That's something that you share together, and it's something that kind of binds you and connects you in various ways. And that's another powerful way to build community, just spending time together.
Contribution is another pillar, and you talk about positive feedback and how we can share that, as leaders, to let employees know the impact that they're making, the contribution that they're making at work. How do we do this effectively? I know there's a lot of different ways to provide positive feedback, but maybe some examples about how you talk about it in the book.
This was one of the biggest learnings for me going through this process, was the power of positive feedback and how much it matters and how often we forget to do it. There's recent research from Gallup and WorkHuman showing that one thank you once a week from a manager was enough to cut disengagement and burnout in half.
That's incredible.
That's one thank you once a week from a manager, right? So small, so simple, and less than 40% of people in that study felt like they were adequately recognized for their work, right? We're just not doing it all the time. We're not remembering to do it all the time. Just, thanking people, the old good job, this was great, I really appreciate what you did here, is small. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it's really impactful. To really make it land, we have a model called the best feedback model. That's just a way to deliver positive feedback very effectively, that also tells people what they should be doing more of, right? And so best is behavioral, explicit, strengths-based, and timely. So behavioral, what was the thing that you did? Explicitly tell people, how did it impact me? Why was it a good thing? What was it that came out of that? Strengths-based, what is it that I saw in you that was good as a result of that? And of course, timely, we want to be telling people these things as soon as possible after the event occurred, not waiting until the end of the year for an annual review. And so, that could look like, Brandon, I really appreciated before this podcast that you took the time to prepare me for, what you were going to talk about. It made me feel a lot more comfortable. And I really felt going into this like, I was going to be able to talk about things that were important to me. And that was, very kind and conscientious of you. And so I appreciate it.
The beauty of something like that is like, I want to keep doing it.
Exactly. More, right. And so next time you have a guest, you'll probably do that again because you're like, oh, I know this works and people appreciate it. And so as a leader, it's a way for me both to recognize you for doing good work and also help you do more of the things I want to see from you.
Wes, earlier you talked about the moments that matter exercise, and I know this helps people connect to the contributions that they're making at work. Maybe go a little deeper on what that exercise is all about and how I know there's a framework in the book around how to do this exercise, but maybe just talk a little bit more about why you put it in there and why it's meaningful.
One of the other things that we learned in the research was that very often meaning comes from taking a step back and reflecting. And this is something that I have to continuously remind myself to do. I'm really busy. I have meetings all day. I have all these things to deliver for clients and, of course, family commitments, personal commitments, other things that I'm interested in outside of just my job. And it's easy to rush from one thing to the next, and then on Instagram, and then got to answer my emails and all of those things without taking a step back to think about, what did I actually do today? And what was something that happened that actually was meaningful to me, that was positive for me? And so the Moments That Matter exercise is just an opportunity. It's a prompt for you to take a step back and say, what part of my job do I really like? Am I proud of? Or, is there a specific experience? Not like, oh, like when I help people, that makes me proud or whatever. It's like specifically, well, there was this moment with Brandon when, I gave him some advice and then he came back to me and told me, what, that advice like really helps me move through. So we want to focus on these really specific moments and then identify what was the thing about that moment that actually was meaningful to me. And then we know, again, just in the same way as, the positive feedback, we know like which things we can kind of pursue more of. And also we have these little, I think about these as like, when you're running a marathon, you have those little gels, that you like, the energy gels that you take like once a mile or once every couple of miles or whatever. And those moments of meaning, they're kind of like that. They're small, but they keep us going. They give us energy for the road ahead. And so if we're taking a step back regularly and looking at those things and making sure we pay attention to those things, it's really energizing.
Challenge is a third C. And I loved when you talked about autonomy and you mentioned Pinterest's Make-a-thon and Google's 20% time. And those are good examples of like how freedom and choice can fuel meaning in their work. So how do leaders, take those examples and make it their own and try to ignite meaning in people's work?
This is, especially as we get into more and more into an environment where what worked yesterday isn't necessarily going to work or be successful tomorrow, we have to be continuously looking at different ways to do things, new ways to do things, reinventing our processes, reinventing our business models. And that's not something that just a few people can do. We need everyone's voice on that. We need everyone's ideas and perspective. And to do that, we have to give people the space to experiment, to try new things, to learn new things. And the way that we advocate doing for this that's meaningful, because very often too, leaders are like, well, we can't just have a free for all. Like it can't be the Wild West around here.
Run a business here.
Yeah, we don't want to give people too much autonomy. And so there's this balance between too much autonomy and then micromanaging, which nobody likes, right? That we call aligned autonomy. And so just kind of referring back to the alignment that was so important, the values alignment that we talked about earlier. When you have values alignment, when you've talked and explained very clearly what your values are, which you hold important in the organization, and given people examples of what that looks like, and then given them a goal, they know kind of what their boundaries are, right? Because those values, the alignment with those values is a guide, and it's also a set of guardrails for them to experiment within. It's their sandbox that they can play in to figure out how to do something. And so, being more goal-oriented than task-oriented is a way to do that. And yeah, and just being clear about what those values are and the rules of the road is really helpful. And so the Ritz-Carlton is a really excellent example of a company that does this very successfully in a very high pressure, high stakes environment, right? Like you pay a lot of money to stay at the Ritz for a night or two. And you would think the company's over 100 years old, they're known for this excellent service. You would think that they have all of these rules and protocols for how to handle guests and all of that. And they actually don't have any. They have values, and they really lean into, when you come on board at the Ritz, there's this 2-week onboarding process. You learn about all of the values, you hear stories about them, and their rule is, we want to create Ritz-Carlton customers for life, right? And if you have a customer issue or if you see something wrong, you can do whatever you want to fix that issue and make that customer have an excellent experience. And oh, by the way, like, you can spend up to $2,000 doing that. No questions asked, right? And so we heard, when we were talking to people at the Ritz, about, like maids, janitors, walking by, like hearing a child crying and upset because they didn't have their toy from home and the parents were upset. So they would like go out and buy that toy and wrap it up and bring it to the room to like make the child feel better, to give the parents a break, that kind of thing. And that's because they were given the autonomy to do that, the freedom to do that, because they know what the values are and they know what the goal is. And so they don't look at it and say, well, that's not my job. Like, I'm a maid, I only clean and make beds and stuff like that. Everyone's job is to make these Ritz-Carlton customers for life. So, and not everybody, of course, has $2,000 to throw at every problem. But, at your own scale, there are ways, like even at Chick-fil-A or at Pret a Manger, which is like another kind of fast casual restaurant, people who work behind the cash register, they have they can give away free items, or they have some discretion on discounting things for people if they think it's going to solve a guest issue or whatever. And you don't have to go to a manager for that. You can just do it.
You make a really important point at the very end of the book, and that's decent work is a prerequisite for meaningful work, and that we need basic needs in place before we can even start talking about passion and meaning at work. What are some of those things that we need?
This is really important and something I think not to be overlooked. Zeynep Ton is a professor at MIT who wrote a book called The Case for Good Jobs that is really articulate about this. But yeah, you have to give people the basics, like a livable wage, basic human respect and decency, reasonable hours, those sorts of things, so that they can just, go about living their lives and have the space to experience meaning, right? If you are grinding people down, if you're not paying them enough and they have to have 3 jobs to earn enough to, support their family and those sorts of things, then it becomes really hard to find meaning in any of those moments, because you're jumping from one thing to the next and you're really struggling, right? And so, I think that's it's just a prerequisite, and it should be for any job.
Wes, in the book, you're calling on leaders to create more meaning at work through the tools that you shared across each of the 3 C's. What's one thing that a leader could do this week to create a more meaningful work for someone on their team?
I think just going back to the positive feedback piece of it, say thank you to someone and tell them what they did and why it was important to you. This is so easy. It costs nothing. You don't need anybody's approval or budget for it. And it's just so powerful, and it has these ripple effects across the organization. So I would say, in the contribution bucket, that's one. In the community bucket, ask someone what they did over the weekend. Ask about their kids, what they care about. Ask some follow-up questions when they tell you, and see if you have any, things to connect on. Do you share any common interests? I think that's, again, simple and very powerful.
Well, Wes, this is the question I like to ask all my guests at the very, very end. It's unrelated to your book, but what's an experience, a person, or an idea that's most shaped the way you think about leadership, workplace culture, or inspired you to write this book? And how does it keep influencing you to this day?
Oh, that's a really good
Dig
question. I'm maybe going to take the easy route, but it's an authentic answer. I think working with Tamara, my co-author, has been just a huge learning experience for me. Like it's been we both like have the same values. We really believe in the same thing. We're passionate about meaning at work, and we approach things from a very different perspective. We come from different backgrounds, and sometimes I've sort of charged forward in a certain way, and she said, well, what about this? Or, have you thought about like how this person might feel about that? And I'm like, oh, that's a good reminder that just because you might have the right answer doesn't mean that you're following the right path to accomplish that thing, right? You really have to think about different people, different perspectives, be adaptable, and I think just always be learning. I think, what was it? I can't remember where I saw it the other day, but it's, like the more I learn, the more I realize how much I have to learn kind of thing. Yeah, it's just that continuously getting better and trying to figure it all out.
Wes, your book is Meaningful Work, How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. I highly recommend listeners go grab a copy. Wes, where can people learn more about you, your work, the book, anything that you want to promote?
Yeah, thank you. You can find information about the book along with all the tools that we talked about free to download on the website at www.makeworkmeaningful.com. There's also an assessment there, so you can take that and see how you're doing on each of the 3 C's, which might give you some insight into which parts of the book to check out. Yeah, and I'd also like to give a plug for the fact that we were just named a Best Leadership Book of 2025 by Next Big Idea Club, which I'm super proud of.
Congratulations.
And yeah, Tamara and I are both on LinkedIn. We're very active there, as well as Instagram. So please find us, connect us, follow us, and we love to answer questions, point you to resources. Yeah, we're always happy to chat. So.
My guest today has been Wes Adams, the co-author of Meaningful Work. Wes, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.